My mother kicked me out of the house because of my new stepfather, and when I became independent, I set boundaries. I was born when my mom, Lisa, was just 22. She often told me she had been scared out of her mind. My father, George, was out of the picture before I even left the hospital. I don't remember him at all, not even a hazy image or a voice. The most I know of him are the rare occasions Mom muttered his name in frustration, usually followed by a sigh about wasted youth. I spent most of my early years with my grandparents, Sarah and Tom. They were retired and had all the patience in the world for a curious, hyper little girl like me. Grandpa Tom had a gentle way of explaining everything, from how to tie my shoes to why the moon seemed to follow us on evening walks. Grandma Sarah, meanwhile, spoiled me with home-cooked meals and a constant stream of hugs. I don't think I realized then how much of my upbringing fell to them while Mom was working on her degree and starting her career. Mom had me young, sure, but she was determined. She went to college part-time while juggling 2 jobs, one as a waitress and another at a call center. By the time I was 8, she had landed a stable position as an office manager. She beamed with pride when she brought me to her office one "Take your child to work" day. I was thrilled because she seemed happy, and I loved seeing her in her element. But looking back, I think she was trying to show me a world where she wasn't constantly overwhelmed. Things changed when I turned 12. That's when Mom started dating again. I remember the first time she mentioned Richard. We were eating spaghetti, and she just casually dropped it in. "So, I've been seeing someone." I didn't know how to respond. Up until that moment, it had always been just the 2 of us and, of course, my grandparents. Mom wasn't the type to date casually, so I figured this was serious. And it was. Within a few months, Richard started coming around the house. He was polite, if a little stiff. He wasn't mean or anything, but he never seemed particularly interested in me either. At 15, Mom and Richard got married in a small ceremony. Mom wore a simple white dress, and Richard looked sharp in a gray suit. I stood by her side, awkwardly holding a bouquet of white roses, unsure how to feel about it all. Grandpa Tom whispered, "Smile, kiddo," as the photographer snapped a picture of the 3 of us. I forced a grin. Mom looked radiant, but something in me felt uneasy. Richard moved in with us right after the wedding. Life didn't change much at first. He was a quiet man who spent most of his evenings watching TV or fiddling with projects in the garage. He wasn't warm, but he wasn't cruel either. I figured that was the best I could hope for. When Mom got pregnant a year after the wedding, things took a sharp turn. It wasn't just one baby, it was twins. Jake and Lily arrived when I was 16, and suddenly, Mom had no time for anything, or anyone else. The house was filled with baby cries, bottles, and stacks of laundry. I tried to help, but I was a teenager trying to navigate my own life. Mom would sometimes bark at me to pitch in more, and I did, but it never felt like enough. It was like the twins were her entire world, and I was just there. Richard, meanwhile, remained his distant self. He adored the twins, though. I'd catch him rocking Lily to sleep or playing peekaboo with Jake, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. By the time I was 18, I had mastered the art of blending into the background. The twins were toddlers, and their endless energy dominated every conversation, every dinner, every weekend. I couldn't remember the last time Mom had asked me how school was going or what I wanted for my birthday. The house, which had always felt cozy if a bit chaotic, now felt suffocating. I turned 18 in the middle of a chaotic summer. Jake and Lily were 4, still full of boundless energy, and Richard's quiet aloofness had turned into something colder. It started small, snapping at me for little things like leaving a plate in the sink or taking too long in the shower. Mom, distracted by the twins, rarely noticed. Even when she did, she'd brush it off with a wave of her hand, saying, "Richard's just stressed. Be patient." One evening, Richard called me into the living room. Mom was sitting beside him, holding Lily on her lap while Jake played with toy cars on the floor. I sat down across from them, already uneasy. Richard's parents, Edward and Linda, were there too, seated stiffly on the couch like they were waiting for a verdict in court. It felt strange having them involved, considering they only ever visited for holidays. Richard cleared his throat. "We need to talk about the future," he began. "Your mom and I, things have been tight lately. The twins need more attention, and money as well. It's not stretching as far as it used to." I nodded slowly, not liking where this was headed. "Okay, what does that have to do with me?" Edward spoke up, his voice sharp and matter-of-fact. "It means you need to start thinking about your own path. You're 18 now. It's time to stand on your own 2 feet. I blinked, stunned. "You're saying I need to move out?" Richard avoided my gaze, but Mom stepped in, her tone far too calm. Honey, it's not like we don't love you. It's just, with the twins and everything, it's becoming too much. And you're an adult now. This is part of growing up. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My head spun as they explained how they simply couldn't afford to keep supporting me, that it was for my own good. They'd even spoken to my grandparents, Sarah and Tom, who had agreed to let me move in with them temporarily. The decision had already been made without me. I packed my things that night. It didn't take long. Most of my belongings fit into 2 duffel bags. Mom helped me carry them to the car, her face tight with a mix of guilt and determination. Richard didn't even come outside to say goodbye. Jake and Lily waved from the living room window, completely unaware of what was happening. When I arrived at my grandparents' small house, Grandma Sarah greeted me with open arms. "You're always welcome here, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a hug. Grandpa Tom carried my bags inside without a word, his face lined with quiet anger. Their house was modest, a 2-bedroom place with creaky floors and furniture that had seen better days. They lived on a small pension, stretching every dollar to make ends meet, but they made space for me without hesitation. I spent the first few days in a haze of disbelief and anger. How could my own mother do this to me? I replayed that living room conversation over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was nothing to understand. They had chosen Richard and the twins over me. Reality hit hard when I realized I needed a job. My grandparents were kind and generous, but I couldn't let them support me entirely, not when they were already scraping by. I applied to every place I could think of and eventually landed a job as a waiter at a local cafe. The pay was $12 an hour, and the work was grueling. I spent long shifts on my feet, juggling plates and dealing with impatient customers. The cafe was run by a couple, Mark and Diane, who were fair but strict. Mark handled the kitchen while Diane managed the front of the house. They had a son, Alex, who worked there part-time and quickly became my first friend outside of school. Alex had a sharp wit and a knack for making even the most stressful shifts bearable. We bonded over shared frustrations, like the regular customer who always sent back his coffee for being too cold, or the dishwasher that broke down every other week. Despite the exhaustion, I managed to finish my final year of high school. Balancing work and school was tough, but I was determined not to let everything I'd worked for go to waste. I spent nights at the kitchen table with Grandpa Tom, who helped me with math problems I couldn't figure out on my own. Grandma Sarah would bring me cups of tea and remind me to take breaks, her voice full of gentle concern. When I graduated, my grandparents were the only ones in the audience. Mom didn't come. She sent a text that morning saying she couldn't find a sitter for the twins. I tried to tell myself I didn't care, but as I walked across the stage to collect my diploma, I couldn't help scanning the crowd, hoping against hope that she'd surprise me. She didn't. College was the next step, but it came with its own set of challenges. I applied to a state university and was accepted, but when it came time to fill out the paperwork for student loans, I hit a roadblock. I needed my mom's signature to verify some financial information. When I called her to ask, she hesitated. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said finally. "What do you mean?" "I need your help to get the loan," she sighed, her voice tinged with irritation. "I don't want to be tied to any of this. You'll have to figure something else out." I was stunned. "Mom, it's just a signature. You're not paying for anything." "Look," she said, her tone firm. "I have to think about the twins. I can't risk anything that might come back on me financially." I hung up the phone in disbelief, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't just refusing to help me. She was actively blocking me from moving forward. It felt like a betrayal, deeper than anything else she'd done. Desperate, I turned to my grandparents. Grandpa Tom offered to co-sign, but his limited income meant I couldn't qualify for the amount I needed. Grandma Sarah tried to comfort me, saying, "We'll figure something out," but I could see the worry in her eyes. I picked up extra shifts at the cafe, determined to save as much money as possible. Every tip, every paycheck went into a savings jar I kept hidden in my room. Alex started covering for me when I needed time to meet with financial aid advisors or fill out scholarship applications. He even gave me rides to the library when my grandparents' old car broke down. It was a slow, uphill battle, but I refused to give up. I wasn't going to let my mom's selfishness define my future. If she didn't believe in me, fine. I'd prove her wrong. The solution to my student loan nightmare came from the most unexpected person, my Aunt Amanda. Growing up, Amanda had always been something of a mystery. She was Mom's younger sister, and their relationship was complicated. Amanda lived out of state and rarely visited. Most of what I knew about her came from offhand remarks by my grandparents, who always spoke of her with a mix of pride and exasperation. She's a free spirit, Grandma Sarah would say, which I took to mean someone who did what she wanted, regardless of the consequences. When I called Amanda out of desperation, it felt like a long shot. I explained my situation in a rush, half expecting her to brush me off or tell me to handle it myself. Instead, she listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions about my plans and why Mom had refused to help. I could hear the anger in her voice when I mentioned how Mom had put the twins ahead of me again. Typical Lisa, Amanda muttered, more to herself than to me. Then, after a pause, she said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." Within a week, Amanda flew into town to meet with me. She was nothing like I'd imagined, tall and confident, with bright red hair and a wardrobe that screamed, successful businesswoman. She carried herself with an air of authority. She didn't waste time on small talk. Instead, she dove right into logistics, reviewing my acceptance letter and financial documents with a level of precision that left me speechless. "I'm going to co-sign your loan," she said matter-of-factly, as though it were the most obvious decision in the world. "But I'm not doing this just because you're family. I'm doing it because I believe in you. You're smart, hardworking, and determined, and those are the kinds of people I bet on." Her confidence in me was overwhelming. No one had ever spoken to me like that before, not even my grandparents. For the first time, I felt like someone truly saw me, not as an obligation or a burden, but as a person with potential. Amanda's belief in me became a driving force, a constant reminder that someone was willing to invest in my future. The loan was approved, and I started college that fall. It was a whirlwind of lectures, late-night study sessions, and an endless stream of assignments. To make ends meet, I continued working at the cafe, but it wasn't enough. I needed more income if I was going to survive the next 4 years without drowning in debt. That's when I discovered freelance web design. It started as a side gig. A friend of Alex's needed a simple website for his landscaping business, and Alex suggested me. I had always been tech-savvy, teaching myself basic coding and design through YouTube tutorials. The project was a success, and I earned $50 for my work. It wasn't much, but it opened a door I hadn't considered before. Word spread quickly. Small business owners and students approached me for help with their websites, and before I knew it, I was juggling multiple projects at a time. It was exhausting but exhilarating. I worked on designs in the early mornings before class, during breaks between shifts at the cafe, and late into the night after finishing my homework. Each completed project felt like a small victory, proof that I was capable of more than I'd ever imagined. By the time I graduated, I had a portfolio of over 100 completed websites. My skills and work ethic caught the attention of one of my professors, Dr. Patel, who recommended me for an internship at a local tech company. The internship paid peanuts, but it was a foot in the door. I accepted without hesitation. The transition from college to the working world was tough. The internship was demanding, and I still had to work part-time at the cafe to cover my living expenses. But I pushed through, driven by the same determination Amanda had instilled in me. I couldn't let her down. Over the years, I climbed the ranks, moving from one position to the next, each with more responsibility and better pay. I said yes to every opportunity, even when it scared me. Public speaking? Sure. Managing a team? Why not? Every challenge became a chance to prove myself, to build a life that no one, not my mom, not Richard, could take credit for. By the time I turned 30, I had landed a management position at a large company. My team worked on developing cutting-edge software for the healthcare industry, and the salary, $150,000 a year, felt surreal. I'd gone from scraping by on tips and $12 an hour shifts to earning more than I'd ever dreamed. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about everything the money represented: independence, success, and the knowledge that I had made it on my own terms. I still stayed in touch with Amanda, calling her every few weeks to update her on my progress. She always responded with the same no-nonsense encouragement that had guided me from the start. "Keep pushing," she'd say. "You're just getting started." Success hadn't gone unnoticed, though I had never made a big deal of it. I preferred to stay grounded and focused on my work. But news travels in families, and eventually, it found its way to Mom and Richard. I hadn't heard much from them since I moved out at 18. There were a few awkward calls during the holidays, mostly superficial updates on Jake and Lily. Mom never asked about my life, and I stopped volunteering information. Over the years, our relationship became more of an afterthought than anything meaningful. One evening, about a month after my 32nd birthday, there was a knock at my door. I had just finished dinner and wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before opening it. To my shock, Mom and Richard were standing there. They looked almost the same as I remembered, except Mom's hair was streaked with gray, and Richard's posture had stiffened. Behind them stood Jake and Lily, now teenagers. The sight of them caught me off guard. "Mom?" I said, confused. "What are you doing here?" She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, honey. We were in the area and thought we'd stop by." I knew that wasn't true. My house was a good 2-hour drive from theirs, but I stepped aside and let them in, unsure of what else to do. Mom immediately began surveying my home, commenting on the furniture and decor. Richard lingered near the doorway, his expression unreadable, while Jake and Lily sat awkwardly on the couch. After a few minutes of strained small talk, Mom finally got to the point. "We've heard how well you've been doing," she said, her tone overly casual. "Your Aunt Amanda mentioned it when we saw her at Christmas." I nodded cautiously. "I've been fortunate. Hard work pays off." "Yes, it does," she said, her smile tightening. "Which is why we're here. We need your help." That's when Richard stepped forward, finally speaking. "The twins are going to college soon, and their education is going to cost a fortune. Between tuition, books, and housing, we're looking at over $200,000. I stared at them, stunned. "You're asking me to pay for their college?" Mom's smile faltered. "It's not like that. We're asking for support. You're successful now, and we've sacrificed so much for you and the twins. It's only fair." Fair. That word hung in the air like a slap. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You think this is fair? You kicked me out when I was 18 because you said you couldn't afford me. I worked my way through school, took out loans, worked 2 jobs just to survive. And now you're here, demanding money? For them?" Richard's face darkened. "Watch your tone. We're your family. Were you thinking about family when you threw me out?" I snapped. "Or when Mom refused to help me with my student loans? You made it clear back then that I wasn't your priority. And now you're asking me to be yours?" Mom's voice took on that familiar, pleading tone I had grown to resent. "It's not about the past. It's about what we need now. You're in a position to help, and the twins deserve the best." I looked over at Jake and Lily, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. They seemed uncomfortable, their eyes fixed on the floor. It wasn't their fault. They were kids, caught in the middle of a mess they didn't create. But I couldn't ignore the years of neglect and rejection I had endured at the hands of the people now asking for my support. "I'm sorry," I said firmly, "but I can't help you." Mom's face crumpled. "You're being selfish." "No," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I'm protecting myself. You don't get to waltz back into my life after everything and act like you're owed something." The argument escalated. Mom accused me of being ungrateful, while Richard stood behind her, grumbling about respect and family obligations. I stood my ground, refusing to be guilt or manipulated. Eventually, I asked them to leave. They did, but not without parting shots about how I'd regret turning my back on my family. The encounter left me shaken, but it didn't end there. Over the next few weeks, they began a campaign of harassment. Mom called constantly, leaving long, emotional voicemails about how much the twins needed me. Richard sent emails, filled with accusations and thinly veiled threats about how I was abandoning my responsibilities. Even Jake and Lily reached out, their messages polite but clearly influenced by their parents. It became unbearable. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't sleep, knowing they were lurking in the background, waiting for another chance to pounce. Finally, I decided enough was enough. With Amanda's help, I contacted a lawyer and filed for a restraining order. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. I couldn't allow them to disrupt my life any further. The restraining order was granted, and the calls and messages stopped. But the fallout rippled through the family. When my grandparents learned what had happened, they were furious. Grandpa Tom, usually the peacemaker, called Mom and gave her an earful. Grandma Sarah, who had always tried to see the good in everyone, said quietly, "I don't know who she is anymore." Their anger wasn't just about the money. It was about the years of neglect and mistreatment they had witnessed. They told me they were cutting ties with Mom, not out of spite, but out of a need to protect themselves and me. It was a painful decision for them, but one they felt was long overdue. In the end, I realized that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about the people who stand by you, who believe in you, and who respect you. For me, that was Amanda, my grandparents, and the few friends who had become like family over the years. As for Mom and Richard, they had made their choices long ago, and I had finally found the strength to make mine. 15 years is a long time. By then, I had built a life far removed from the chaos and bitterness of my past. I hadn't heard a word from Mom, Richard, or the twins since filing the restraining order. It was as though that entire chapter of my life had been sealed off, locked away in a box I never intended to open again. I had moved forward, focused on my career, my friends, and the small circle of people who truly mattered. So when I received a message from an unfamiliar number late one evening, my first instinct was to ignore it. But curiosity got the better of me. The message was brief. "Hi, this is Jake, your brother. I know it's been a long time, but I'd really like to talk to you. If you're open to it, please let me know." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Jake. The name brought back a flood of memories, most of them bitter. I pictured him as the wide-eyed little boy playing with toy cars on the living room floor while our mother and Richard pushed me out of their lives. The idea of reconnecting felt absurd, even dangerous. What if this was a trap? What if Mom had put him up to it? Still, something about the message felt genuine. I decided to reply, keeping it cautious and neutral. "Hi, Jake. I'm surprised to hear from you. What's this about?" His response came quickly, almost as if he'd been waiting for me to reply. "I know this is out of the blue, but I've been thinking about you for a long time. I've wanted to reach out, but I didn't know if you'd want to hear from me. I'm not in contact with Mom or Richard anymore, and I don't want anything from you. I'd like to know my brother." The sincerity in his words caught me off guard. Over the years, I had hardened myself to the idea of family, convinced that nothing good could come from reopening old wounds. But this was different. Jake wasn't asking for money or trying to dredge up the past. He just wanted to connect. We arranged to meet at a cafe near my office. I arrived early, nerves twisting in my stomach. I had no idea what to expect. When Jake walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. He was no longer the small, shy boy I remembered. He was tall and lean, with a thoughtful expression and a nervous energy that mirrored my own. "Hey," he said, his voice uncertain but warm. "Thanks for meeting me." I nodded, gesturing for him to sit. "No problem. It's good to see you." The conversation started slowly, both of us tiptoeing around the minefield of our shared history. Jake told me about his life, how he had gone to college on a scholarship, started a career in environmental science, and recently moved to the city for work. He spoke with a quiet confidence, but there was a vulnerability in his tone when he began to talk about our family. "I don't know how much you know," he said, "but things weren't great after you left. Mom and Richard, they weren't the best parents. They were so focused on controlling everything, and it got worse as we got older. Lily and I both moved out as soon as we could." Hearing this stirred something in me. I had assumed the twins had grown up in the same bubble of favoritism and comfort that had excluded me. The idea that they had also struggled was difficult to process. "I didn't know," I admitted. I thought you and Lily were their whole world." Jake shook his head. "That's what it looked like, but it wasn't real. They had high expectations, and if we didn't meet them, things got ugly. Richard was especially bad. He wasn't violent, but he was controlling and manipulative. And Mom, she just let it happen. She always made excuses for him." There was a long silence as I absorbed his words. It was strange, hearing this from someone who had once been a symbol of everything I resented. I felt a flicker of guilt for the assumptions I had made about him and Lily, but also a deep sense of relief that Jake was sitting here now, reaching out. "I'm sorry you went through that," I said finally. "I know what it's like to feel like you're on your own." Jake nodded, his expression softening. "That's part of why I wanted to reach out. I've spent a lot of time thinking about you, wondering what happened after you left. I know we were just kids, but I feel bad about how things went down. I didn't understand it back then, but now, I do, and I want to make it right." We talked for hours, sharing stories and filling in the gaps of the years we had missed. Jake told me about his career, his hobbies, and his plans for the future. He asked about my life, genuinely curious about everything I had accomplished. There was no jealousy or bitterness in his questions, just a desire to connect. By the time we left the cafe, I felt something I hadn't expected: hope. Jake wasn't the same boy I had left behind, and I wasn't the same person who had walked away. We had both grown, shaped by our experiences, and now we had a chance to rebuild something new. In the weeks that followed, Jake and I grew closer. He introduced me to his friends, and I showed him around my world. We didn't talk much about Mom or Richard. There was no need. We both understood that some parts of the past were best left untouched. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a piece of my family back. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was real, and that was enough.